Who would have imagined that at the start of a new decade, we would face the kind of disruptions we are facing today? However, disruptions are not new. We experienced disruptions in the past. We're currently experiencing disruptions, and I suspect we'll be experiencing more disruptions in the future. Some of these disruptions are from natural disasters, acts of terrorism, virus outbreaks, and so much more. We've experienced disruptions closer to home in our personal lives and in our professional lives. Raise your hand or nod if your routine at work has changed. Has it changed over the last 6 months, 9 months, even 12 months? Yes, many of us have had our workplace routines interrupted. And these interruptions, I suspect, many are no fault of your own. In fact, they were out of your control. For example, how many of you have experienced a change in your reporting structure? Meaning, did you have a new boss? A new lead? I have. During this past year, I've had 2 different supervisors. How many of you have experienced a transfer to a different department, a transfer to a different location? These are examples of disruptions in your workplace routine. And maybe I'm speaking a little closer to home when I ask this next question. How many of you have had colleagues who've left your department or who've left your organization? And what's more surprising, how many of you have leadership who decided not to backfill those positions? So it might actually be you picking up additional work duties, maybe for the interim, short term, or perhaps some of you have those new work duties embedded into your existing position descriptions. These are just other examples of workplace disruptions. In our time together, I will help you recognize disruptions in your workplace, disruptions in your personal life, and hopefully how to transform those disruptions to successfully navigate our current reality. So what is the underlying problem with workplace disruptions? Why don't you pull out a sheet of paper, jot down something? What do you feel is the underlying problem with disruptions in your workplace, with your workplace routines? The underlying problem with workplace disruptions is that it jeopardizes productivity. There are some empirical studies that have recently come out from the University of California, Irvine, as well as Humboldt University, that talk about the cost of interruptions. Did you know that after only 20 minutes of interruptions, employees experienced higher stress? Only after about 20 minutes. That stress led to frustration, an insurmountable amount of work that they feel they can never get done, that all of the efforts put into getting projects done we're wasted, and that internal increased pressure. So absolutely, workplace routines that are interrupted jeopardizes the productivity because of all these things are happening in our heads. It's what Stephen Covey, the late Stephen Covey, used to call clutter. It's our internal clutter. And these problems, if not dealt with, can escalate. And frequent disruptions make it difficult to concentrate, and as a result, generate more stress. And that stress takes over our minds, our bodies, and helps really bring us down to that unhealthy side, the side that we so often camouflage and only show our best self to others. Workplace disruptions almost always happens when we have competing priorities. How many of you have more than just a full-time job? How many of you, on top of your more than a full-time job, are asked to serve on committees? A search committee, a strategic plan committee? How many of you are asked to lead a project? How many of you are asked to take on a process improvement initiative? How many of you are asked to serve as a principal for a grant? All of this leads to our best faith effort in what we call multitasking. That's right, I said multitasking. You know, multitasking is something that I used to be recognized for. I grew up in an environment that praised individuals who were good multitaskers. So I was curious. I looked up multitasking. Did you know that multitasking actually was a reference that was made back in 1965 as a new program? Individuals looking at single computers that could actually do work simultaneously. So a single computer doing two or more things simultaneously. We're not computers. The last time I checked, we're humans. But multitasking has overlapped into the human world. We are asked to do more and more, faster and faster, with the same level of quality and results. And I have to tell you, that's not productive and that's not healthy. In fact, a Yale professor concluded that multitasking is actually bad for us. Yes, this professor used the word bad for us. And research shows we can't really do two things at the same time. Some of us, like myself, who's a recovering multitasker, would say, I disagree with that research. Show me the evidence. Well, in fact, evidence does exist. If you were to simply do a Google search, multitasking, good or bad for you, most often than not, you will find so much research out there that multitasking is not the recommended approach to getting our work done. Further dissected, multitasking is actually what scientists call switch tasking. We clearly cannot do two things at the same time. But for those of you who say, no, I could really multitask, you're really switch tasking. You are conducting research, waiting for that Zoom conference call to come on. But when that call comes on, you shift your focus. You switch your focus to your conference call. Some of you may say, oh no, I listen to music, or I can watch TV and still read articles and still grade papers. But if you were to take, in fact, a step back, you'll see that what you're simply doing is switch tasking. And switch tasking could be productive, but for a long period of time, it does have impacts to our health, to our stability, our mental health, and our frame of mind. So I just shared with you some examples of disruptions in the workplace, in your workplace. So let's talk about other disruptions, the kind that we can't really control. Let's focus on natural disasters. On March 10th, 1933, Southern California, specifically Long Beach, California, experienced an earthquake of a 6.4 magnitude. That earthquake killed 115 people. I wasn't in California to experience that earthquake, but later on, we've had a number of earthquakes. The one I can remember occurred on January 17th, 1994. Were you around back then to experience the Northridge earthquake? I remembered that, and it shook California, Southern California, at its 6.7 magnitude. Earthquakes are not an everyday occurrence. It's not an everyday disruption, but when it occurs, it has such magnitude. That Northridge earthquake killed about 57 people and sustained approximately 50 million in damages. Let's talk about other disruptions. The disruptions of historical figures, such as Rosa Parks. Many of you are familiar with her story. Rosa Parks and her actions disrupted what was happening during that time, and the ramifications of her act impacted so many of us today. So you can see on your screen how Rosa Parks wants to set the record straight. You can see exactly why she didn't give up her seat. How many of you are tired of our current reality? Are you working from home with family members right at your side who don't understand what you do to make a living? According to a study published in the April issue of Training and Development magazine, a publication from the Association of Talent and Development, stated that employees actually like telecommuting. So in this picture, some of you might actually embrace the opportunity to work remotely, to work from home, to work from your dining room table. But despite liking telecommuting, you still face challenges. So remember that piece of paper I asked you to pull out? Okay, bring that back out and jot down, what do you think are the top 5 challenges facing employees who are working remotely? Go ahead, jot them down, just top 5 challenges. And if you can't speak for everyone, think about what are some challenges facing you? Are there 1, 2, are there 5 challenges that you are experiencing right now as a result of working remotely? Okay, so see how much you align with the results of the study. Did home distractions make it on your list? How about staying motivated? How about communication? Just communication challenges, communication barriers How about collaboration? The inability to collaborate in real time, or the distractions of everything else that minimizes the ability to focus on truly collaborating on a project? And then the last thing, did loneliness make it on your list? Unlike this picture, not everyone working remotely has people sitting right alongside of them, waiting for them to disconnect. Some are working alone remotely. And so that feeling of loneliness does tend to escalate. Or are you a student learning from home? Are you a professor teaching from home? For students, when you apply to college, is this what you were expecting? First-time freshman or a transfer student to be working on your dining room table or your desk at home, trying to learn without the advantages of group study, without the advantages of interacting with your professor in person? Clearly, these are our challenges of our current reality. So look back at what you jotted down. It's important to jot these things down because, like I said earlier, it's so much easier for us to put our best self forward. It kind of reminds me of that cartoon, and it was called The Jetsons. So I apologize for those of you who can't relate to this example, but look it up. I know it exists on the internet. So I used to watch The Jetsons, and it was a family who lived in space. Jetsons was their last name. And it was a mother, a father, a daughter, a son, and they had a robot named Rosie. And so when they would call each other, it's very similar to a Zoom call. They would dial up and they would have these conversations on the screen. And now that I think about it, I thought, wow, that was so innovative. And to think, years and decades, we are having the similar experience that the Jetsons had. So one of these episodes, Judy, who was the mother, clearly was not put together. But all she had to do before she connected with her friend was open up a closet full of pre-made face masks. It almost kind of reminds me of the Bourne series. So she would put on this face mask and it would have her face with makeup, her hair ready to go. And she was ready to connect with her friends and have a conversation. You know, we haven't progressed to hold those Zoom sessions. And actually, part of me is happy that we haven't, because so much of it doesn't represent who we really are. So when you take a look at your list and you reference what are these challenges, it's really important for you to recognize that it's okay not to have it all together. We are humans. We are not robots. We are humans. And so when you think about your current reality, it's not the same for everyone. Some of you are working remotely without any other distractions in your home. Some of you are comforted by family members. Some of you are comforted with furry friends. But the way we start navigating successfully our current reality is to recognize what we currently have to deal with. And it starts with admission. It starts with admitting when we don't have it together, when we might need an extra moment, when we might need to reschedule a session. So whether these disruptions are from natural disasters, from a virus outbreak, acts of terrorism, Workplace disruptions, I hope you can see now, are clearly not new. And it's how we react to these disruptions that will make the difference. We as employees, we as workers are resilient, and we've endured these disruptions. So now let's focus on how we can truly navigate our current reality and find some sanity when this is all over. One of those techniques is to look for silver linings. I shared with you the earthquake back in 1933. It killed about 115 people and sustained numerous damages throughout Southern California. A silver lining to that earthquake was new building codes for schools. Schools were retrofitted. So then when we have earthquakes again, which we usually do in Southern California, it hopefully will minimize the amount of damages to our buildings. The 1994 Northridge earthquake that killed 57 individuals, injured over 900 people, sparked economic growth of earthquake kits and emergency supplies for both the workplace and for our homes. I don't know about you, but in my vehicle, I do have one of those emergency kits, and I have a first aid kit, because driving around in Southern California, we never truly know when we will have another earthquake. The acts of terrorism, the acts on September 11, 2001, disrupted the way we travel, specifically air travel. Pull out your notepad, and just quickly think about what could be some silver linings around 9/11, September 11th. What are some of those silver linings? But the way we start navigating successfully our current reality is to recognize what we currently have to deal with. And it starts with admission. It starts with admitting when we don't have it together, when we might need an extra moment, when we might need to reschedule a session. So whether these disruptions are from natural disasters, from a virus outbreak, acts of terrorism, workplace disruptions, I hope you can see now, are clearly not new. And it's how we react to these disruptions that will make the difference. We as employees, we as workers are resilient, and we've endured these disruptions. So now let's focus on how we can truly navigate our current reality and find some sanity when this is all over. One of those techniques is to look for silver linings. I shared with you the earthquake back in 1933. It killed about 115 people and sustained numerous damages throughout Southern California. A silver lining to that earthquake was new building codes for schools. Schools were retrofitted. So then when we have earthquakes again, which we usually do in Southern California, it hopefully will minimize the amount of damages to our buildings. The 1994 Northridge earthquake that killed 57 individuals, injured over 900 people, sparked economic growth of earthquake kits and emergency supplies for both the workplace and for our homes. I don't know about you, but in my vehicle, I do have one of those emergency kits, and I have a first aid kit, because driving around in Southern California, we never truly know when we will have another earthquake. The acts of terrorism. The acts on September 11th, 2001 disrupted the way we travel, specifically air travel. Pull out your notepad, and just quickly think about what could be some silver linings around 9/11, September 11th. What are some of those silver linings? Okay, feel free to keep writing. I'll just share with you some of the silver linings for me. I'll take you back to September 13th, 2001. I have an older sister, and part of her job, she travels quite a bit. She needed to travel, and I, including family, friends, my parents said, "You are not traveling, cancel it." So her airline tickets were actually for September 12th, clearly canceled it. But on September 13th, she received clearance to travel, and she did. I have to tell you, it was bittersweet. There were a lot more she experienced at the airport, but when she came back safely home from her business travel, she shared with me that it was probably one of the most safest experiences flying that she's ever had. So that was a silver lining. The increased safety measures that airlines have taken to ensure safety for those who travel by air. A silver lining for me, I've learned to pack lighter. I did not want to pay extra baggage fees, and I have learned to pack lighter. And so, although that may seem a little insignificant, during these times, we have to find ways to embrace these silver linings during our current reality. And in fact, during global epidemic, organizations invested in employees' professional development. I've been in the human resources field for over 20 years and just focused on professional development in just the last 5. And I can tell you that whenever organizations experience a drop in profits, I used to work for the private sector, the first to go are training and development opportunities. Let's take a step back. How different our leadership and organizations have taken, the different direction that they've taken, where they're now making investments in our professional development. Did you know that approximately 42% of companies today have planned to invest in training their employees? In fact, 42% of those are training in problem-solving skills, a skill that we all still need to thrive in our businesses today. 40% of those companies have invested in training for communication skills. And lastly, 57% of those organizations have focused on leadership and management training. So pull out that pad of paper again and jot down, what new skill have you learned as a result of our current reality? Don't just look at me. Jot down, what skill have you learned that have helped you in your current reality? I'll pull out a sheet of paper or two and jot down a few of my own. Okay, so some of you may be thinking, is she for real? I have been faced with so many things in my current reality that I clearly don't have time to dedicate to professional development. But when you think about it, I'm not thinking about your aspirational goals. I'm thinking about what skills have you learned just to help you stay above water during your current reality? Have some of you become Zoom whisperers, meaning an expert in Zoom? What else have you learned through your current reality? You know, according to Dale Carnegie, he stated that most of the important things in the world have been accomplished by those who have kept on trying when there seemed to be no hope at all. How many of you are feeling like that snail? Could you really push that boulder up that hill? Or is it just a trick? Is it not really a hill, but a flat surface? So let's unpack that a little bit. Identify yourself as the snail. What is your rock? What is that rock in your current reality? I was that snail. I was that snail last year. And a doctorate degree was my rock. I lost hope of ever completing my dissertation when I experienced a workplace disruption. But through resources and support, I was able to help navigate my current reality. And today, I am here in front of you saying, it's not impossible. And I became a proud member of the class of 2020 with a Doctor of Education. So what is that rock for you? It's not too late. And it was the great Nelson Mandela who said, everything seems hopeless until it's done. So when you are feeling hopeless, consider some of these approaches. It may sound rather simple, but when you unpack it, it can go a lot deeper. Simple approach could be looking at healthy ways to cope. Because of our current situation and our current reality, studies have shown, and you've seen it, you've heard it in the news, that there's an actual increase in drug abuse and alcohol abuse, probably because it's so close to us. Our refrigerators are right there next to us. But there's other healthy ways to cope. And I can't do it for you. Your supervisor can't do it for you. You need to take that intentional step. So what are some healthy ways that you can cope? I know for me, I decided to stop my Starbucks habit and actually make coffee at home. For some of you who say, I don't do coffee, what are some other healthy ways that you have learned to cope? Do you actually take your entitled 10 or 15-minute break? If you do, I applaud you for that. How many of you take a walk around the block, or maybe just up and down the stairs if you live in a 2-story home? How many of you focus on making sure you get the right amount of sleep and that you eat healthy? Other ways to cope is self-care. And I don't like that that word is so overused that we stop thinking about what that means to us. Self-care not only is looking at making time for yourself, but looking at your whole self, your mind, your body, and your spirit. I have never been one for journaling, so I tried it. And I have to tell you, it's really helped release some of my mind clutter. I do take time out to reflect and meditate. So these are things that you can do to try to help navigate your current reality. I recognize that some of you work 10, 12 hours. You don't know when to disconnect. But I also want to remind you that your supervisor is not there to remind you to clock out. It really is you who needs to take these intentional steps. Other ways that you can cope is to open up and share. I mentioned earlier that many of us don't want to share. We don't feel comfortable not showing up with our best self. But these are the times that you can help build your relationships. Share with your team lead, share with your colleagues that today is not going to be a good day. That today, as much as you bring the best version of yourself, you may fall short. So cut yourself some slack. Yes, cut yourself some slack. And lastly, if you don't know where to start, you don't know where to begin, you're lost and you need some help, but maybe you're newly hired to your organization, you haven't built those relationships yet. Activate resources. Many of your organizations have an employee assistance program that's confidential and can be anonymous. So take advantage of those. Everything that I'm seeing here today is nothing new. It's not rocket science. We've had podcasts and articles and workshops. It's in the news. These are things that you can do. You know what you can do. But when will you actually take the first step to doing it? In the spirit of learning and development, I constantly remind you to reinvent yourself. This is your opportunity to disrupt yourself, adjust to your new normal. If you're not getting enough sleep, nobody else can give you that. You have to be intentional about your sleeping habits and your patterns. A simple thing might be to get back to your old routine. I know many of us don't necessarily have a commute, so why not take that time you would have used to commute to work to sleep in or to get some exercise? You may also want to consider asking yourself, where do you see yourself 2 to 4 years from now? Because when we think future, that helps us, at least psychologically, move beyond our current reality. Think about what skill set do you need to be a more competitive candidate for that long-term job or that job that you'd like to retire from. When you think about teams, it's really important to start to understand where your relationships are among your team members. When you think about relationships, is there a particular relationship that needs a little bit more work? Or is there a really good relationship you don't want to lose when we repopulate the campus? What relationships do you need to stay in touch with to reinforce that camaraderie that you're so used to having, or we did have? You know, according to a live career study, a recent study just this year, workers were asked, how is communication with your direct manager and your colleagues? 31% of the workers surveyed said that the communications have actually improved. 46% said the communication really hasn't changed. And 33% of those surveyed said the communication actually deteriorated. So let's think about this. Sit back a little bit. How does this compare to your current experience? How has communication changed, not changed, or stayed the same in your current reality? The last thing I'll share along the lines of team is trust. Trust has been something that many have taken for granted. Trust is so critical, especially during these times when these Zoom conversations and interactions lose the ability to assess someone's body language. So don't let your location dictate your sense of camaraderie, and don't take trust for granted. Interestingly enough, this same Live Career 2021 study showed that 2 out of 3 employees still feel a sense of belonging to their organizations. So despite our current reality, people are continuing to stay engaged. And lastly, I'll share that navigating, as you know, especially for those of you who travel, navigating is easier when you have a roadmap. So how much time will you dedicate to your learning journey map? Here are some practical tips and some questions. As mentioned earlier, think about what are your next steps? What are your next goals? Because when you think about the future, it really does help you move beyond the current reality. How much support do you need? How much support do you need now? In our realities, as we began this journey together, there were so many questions about what you need, what system setup, what do you need from home? And less are we asking those questions. And perhaps because we're making the assumption that you have exactly what you need. But during these last months, years, our needs may have changed. Some of us who have children, some of those individuals have gone back to school. So resources may have changed. So don't forget to ask for support and what are your current needs now? Who will you ask? Well, clearly start with your supervisor, but sometimes we have made connections and the needs that we have may not necessarily come from our supervisor. It may come from another subject matter expert that we met through a Zoom call or a Zoom conference. And lastly, what is your learning journey? What is it that you want to learn, you need to learn? There is no longer wait till tomorrow. Why not start today? And additional steps that you can take would be commemorate the anniversary of your current reality. Think back, how long did it take to get you to where you're at today? It's perfectly okay to look back. We often learn from the past. Some of us fail forward. So commemorate the anniversary of your current reality. And again, admission is healthy. What have you learned along the way? Secondly, accept change. Some of us want to get back to the good old days. Well, think about what really was good about some of those days. And when we think about our future, there have been some amazing things that have come out of our current reality. And lastly, it might be difficult to accept change. It's going to be even more difficult to embrace change. When it comes to learning and development, maybe what you could do for mini steps is take a look at focusing on micro learning strategies. If you don't have time to watch a training video for an hour, there are so many micro learning sessions that are 10 or 15 minutes that focus on that specific skill set that you'd like to learn. So think about learning in bite-sized proportions. You need another suggestion? Personalize your incentives. Invest in your personal development and then reward yourself. Instead of taking that Starbucks drink for granted, why not say you won't have a Starbucks drink until you finish that micro-learning session? And lastly, I'd like to say, one of the things that we often take for granted is how much we've accomplished. And one way you can do that is, are you ready for this? Do I have your full attention? Here goes. Update your resume. Yes, I said it. Update your resume. When was the last time you looked at your resume? I say this not to encourage you to find a new job. I say this because when we update our resumes, we often list our accomplishments. We often list the skills that we've learned. So even though you're not looking for a new job, take the time to update your resume. And then when you're done, sit back and take a look at how much you've learned over this last few months, over the last year. As our time together comes to a close, I'd like to just reiterate what I said earlier. Disrupt yourself. Disrupt your current reality. Own your career plan and execute a strategy for growth.